looking into the question of the evolution of farming in leafcutter ants and what the comparisons are, if any, to the evolution of farming in humans. And one of the comparisons is, well, humans originated farming many, many times across the world. In fact, in China alone, there are 2 different evolutions of farming. There's at least one origin in Europe, maybe more, a couple in the New World, several all over the world. But it's always, it seems, within like about 10 to 12,000 years ago. 12,000 years ago is about as far back as we think farming goes. There was some domestication happening before then, but agriculture is 10 to 12,000 years ago in each of the places that it happens independently, whereas ants started farming 50 million years ago. They've had a bit of a head start on us.
They definitely thought of it.
Funny, of course, to say it that way, but of course, one of the big differences, one of the reasons that we have been able to, catch up and in some ways, you might say, surpass them in terms of the diversity that we have employed our farming with, is that, of course, for them, presumably, it's entirely genetic. Right, they're little robots running around doing their thing, and it's working for them, and it's working for the fungus that they are farming on the leaves that they are cutting and carrying and growing the fungus on as substrate. But they are not learning in real time, right? To how to farm better or different things or anything. And so there's a lot, of course, to be said about this. But there was one paragraph in this really remarkable paper, really long, like a monograph in a book called Insect Fungal Associations, Ecology and Evolution, a piece by Schultz et al. From 2005 is when this book was published, called Reciprocal Illumination, a Comparison of Agriculture in Humans. And so the comparison is, okay, we have these Attian ants who've been farming for 50 million years, and humans who've been farming for 10 to 12,000 years. And what are some of the comparisons? So
question.
Yeah.
Are you going to describe that farming, or should we do that in advance of you reading this?
Go for it.
The basics of the farming involve the removal of pieces. You've undoubtedly seen pictures of ants which have cut a kind of fingernail-shaped piece of a leaf. They do this from canopy trees. They bring them one piece at a time in large numbers down into an underground cavity where they grow a fungus, which is uniquely adapted to this association. It grows on the leaves because the ants are animals. They actually do not, for whatever reason, have the chemical capacity to break down the leaves directly. Fungus, for whatever reason, are much better at advanced feats of organic chemistry, and they are able to break down the cellulose and other components of the leaves. And so, essentially, the ants facilitate the growth of the fungus, and they eat the fungus, and this is clearly mutualistic interaction with many fascinating offshoots and other features.
Indeed, and there are many stages of agriculture in these ants. The leafcutters being, by our estimation, with our anthropomorphic lens on it, the pinnacle of Attine agriculture, of ant agriculture. But there are many stages that are less tightly symbiotic. There are pathogens that are also co-evolved with this fungus ant coevolution. So it's just. The story just goes more and more amazing the deeper you go. But this is not going to be that story here. The paragraph I want to read from this paper, Schultz et al. 2005, and I'll have you show my screen when I'm ready to read it here, just talks about the question of who has the control. So with humans, we imagine that, okay, well, we're the farmers, therefore, the crops that we have domesticated, be they plant or animal, or in some cases fungus, are clearly under our control. We are the masters. And you can similarly look at ants and guess the same thing. And there's some evidence with regard to the ants, given what we can tell. 50 million years is a long time for this association to be happening, so it's hard to know. It's impossible to know exactly what the ants 50 million years ago, who were not farming, looked like and what they were eating, but all evidence suggests that they were basically eating arthropods, insects, live and dead. And the advantages to the fungus and to the ants for going into this sort of farming relationship it seems like there's some evidence that actually the fungus might have had more of a drive to end up being in this association with the ants than the ants did, which raises questions about control, about, who's actually in control here. And when you think you see a system in which one or the other person, organism, system, whatever it is in control, maybe look more closely, look from a different angle, and find that actually control has a lot of different levers and a lot of different ways of manifesting itself. So let's go with this this paragraph here, and I'll just put it on the screen so people can read along.
That did not work.
Nope, it did not work. And if it doesn't work.
Hold on, let's try one more time. You got that plugged in?
It is plugged in still.
Nope.
It's very blue. Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and unplug that so that I do not risk my computer suddenly showing up. And I will just read it off the screen, and I'll link to this in the show notes. Again, from Schultz et al. 2005. We suspect that most readers will resist our suggestion that human agriculturalists were once under the partial control of their proto-domesticates during the early evolutionary process that ultimately led to human agriculture. Human intuition suggests that we are not under the control of the cabbages and tomatoes that we plant in our backyards, that cabbages cannot facultatively escape from our gardens and from their inevitable destinies of death in our kitchens, and that cabbages have not enslaved us to labor on their evolutionary behalf. Human intuition can be misleading, however. We know, for example, that human symbionts can sometimes induce profound behavioral changes in humans that benefit the symbiont. The rabies virus induces drastic aggressive behavior to facilitate its spread to new potential hosts, and coca plants induce in humans a physical addiction and a craving for more coca, which requires the cultivation of more coca plants. Though seemingly far-fetched and in conflict with our intuitions, we cannot at this point rule out similar manipulations during the pre-agricultural evolution of humans, a stage when humans began to assemble the behavioral repertoires that ultimately led to agricultural systems guided by human planning and intentional experimentation. This I wanted to just put out there for people who have not given farming much thought, given ant farming much thought, ant agriculture much thought, as a different way in to being able to question of any system that you think you understand, who is actually pulling the strings, who's actually calling the shots.
I want to, there's one thing in that paragraph that I find troubling. The use of rabies as an example, right after the term symbiont, because rabies is clearly not a symbiont.
Yep.
And so, I think it's a very worthy exploration.
But so symbiont, it's not. But is it able to exert a behavioral influence on us? Of course it is.
Of course. Yes. And, the case of coca is a better example where it is likely a mutualism. And there are many examples of human mutualisms. There are plants which are only known from human cultivation, which suggests that an ancestor changed radically in order to partner with humans.
What are you thinking of?
Salvia.
So there's lots of salvias, but the salvia that is used as a psychoactive, as an entheogen
in central Mexico is only known from the gardens of the population that utilizes it. It's a fascinating plant. There is a euphorbia in Madagascar, which is only known from gardens. It's not clear whether that's a mutualism or whether it's simply gone extinct in the wild and been preserved by people. But in any case, there are a number of examples. And I do think, evolutionarily, I would say the real question, effectively, what you have to realize is that a mutualism tends to start as a parasitism. And a parasitism that does not harm, but in fact, in some indirect way, helps the creature being parasitized is almost immediately a mutualism, and because the creature that is being parasitized, but it ends up being a net positive thing, then becomes augmented to facilitate this interaction.
Right.
And if you think about the classic case of something like a hummingbird, taking nectar and transporting pollen for a flower to which it is adapted. It seems like, they're cooperating. But of course, the hummingbird is truly indifferent to the well-being of the plant, at least first order. And
at least first order.
At least first order. And the plant is indifferent to the hummingbird. They are each taking advantage of each other. And because they are both getting a benefit that outweighs the cost that they are paying, we say, it's a cooperation. And there's nothing wrong with that. In fact,
well, and the tighter the cooperation, the tighter the need, right?
Right.
This will be the thing that maybe isn't obvious to people who haven't considered, for instance, a hummingbird plant affiliation, which is that the more tight for instance, corolla of the flower is, the particular recurved nature or decurved nature, can't remember which is which, of the hummingbird's beak, the more both of those species actually depend on the other in order to make it into the future.
Right.
Have their genes make it into the future.
And there's a lot of nuance here. It can be that the plant is obligate with respect to what pollinator it needs, and that the pollinator might be a generalist in some cases. There can be cases where the relationship is obligate on both sides.
Mm-hmm.
But in any case, at some point where a mutualism has occurred, we are effectively defining the mutualism based on the fact that both parties are benefiting from what might otherwise be a one-way parasitism.
Mm-hmm.
But that is in some sense our projection onto it. And in any case, it's clear that these ants, and I wish we did have the ability to show your screen and you could show some pictures of this, but these plants are a major force in
These plants?
These ants are a
Okay.
major force in the habitats where they are doing their farming. They're actually significantly altering the amount of photosynthetic capacity of the trees that they're utilizing.
Mm-hmm.
And so that they're a tremendously powerful ecological phenomenon. And what that also means is that this huge amount of productivity that the trees were producing, that the ants had no access to directly, they have found a way to access it through what might have been a parasite on their ancestors, but it turned out to be beneficial, right? In other words, you could imagine a fungus growing inside. I have no idea if this is the proposed mechanism, but that there might have been a fungus growing inside the effectively caverns that these animals created. Maybe it was growing on arthropods. Maybe it was, I'm not sure what it was. And you can imagine maybe ants had, tunneled into some place where there was leaf matter or something, and some fungus is breaking down the leaves. You could see how you could get to a place where actually feeding the fungus would emerge from the accidental fact of a fungus growing on cellulose. But at the point that we arrive currently, and we look at this highly interwoven set of adaptations, right? You have a fungus that can't grow without the ants. You've got ants that are utterly dependent on the fungus. You've got behaviors in which...
That's true what you just said. I had not said that. At this point, the fungus that the ants are farming is obligately in association with ant fungiculture. It does not exist outside of the ant fungiculture, which is remarkable.
It is remarkable. And so then that leads to this consideration, right? I'm always troubled by people's sense that, vegetarianism is a favor to the creatures that we eat.
Mm-hmm.
It is no such thing. Especially for the creatures that we cultivate in large numbers, right? Chickens are far better off evolutionarily than their jungle fowl ancestors. Cows are far better off than their wild relatives, just by virtue of the amount of control that humans exert on the ecosystem. And so, although it's counterintuitive to us...
So the place that you will get dragged for saying that is that you haven't defined better off. You are talking about evolutionarily better off. Individuals might also be, but not in a factory farming situation.
Oh, and that is the place where I would argue that the harm to the individual animals at the level of suffering is so great that even though evolutionarily, even the factory farmed animals are certainly in a better position, that morally we are obligated to confront that problem and to end that practice. But, just as, we're all going to die. It does
Wait,
not.
what?
No,
Oh, okay.
I swear it's true. That does not cause you, it does not invalidate your life, right? It does not make you not want to live while you're here. Likewise, an animal that is going to be slaughtered for food is not, a non-animal. It's an animal with a known end of its life, just as a salmon, Pacific salmon, has a known end of its life right after it reproduces. So anyway, the point is we need to rethink these things because from the, perspective of the organisms in question, the interests are not intuitively obvious to us humans.
Well, and I think one of the pieces you didn't say there is that most of our domesticated food animals, most of those individuals, if not all of those individuals, would not exist but for the fact of our having domesticated them. So the fact that they will die in service of being eaten by humans basically starts the analysis too late. If you're concerned about the lifespan of the individual, consider that the individual never would have existed at all. Would have existed at all.
Yep, and that's exactly it. So anyway, when we get back to the ants, what we've got is an obligate relationship, and that obligate relationship is clearly great for the ants, and it is, clearly great for the fungus. In fact, it's so great that both of them have evolved to become completely dependent on it. And so at this point, there's no point in looking at the relationship and saying who's driving. They're both driving, right? But it doesn't mean, if you traced it back far enough, you would almost certainly find a parasitism that turned out to have a benefit for the victim, and therefore a mutualism grew from it.
And, if only because it is statistically very unlikely that two clades, two individuals, two anythings coming together that end up in a cooperative, romantic, whatever it is, relationship, have exactly the same moment of, hey, here it is. This is what we're going to do, right?
Yep.
So almost always, and we can basically say really almost always, if not always, one of those individuals or clades or entities will have made a move first, will have had an advantage first, will have seen the opportunity first.
Right. And this is, I was actually having a parallel thought, actually. The way to see this clearly is the romantic analog of this, right? Because you can see that individuals are motivated to get involved romantically by a very powerful kind of self-interest, which is so powerful that it predisposes them to a kind of mutualism. But let's take the case of two randos, right? Considering whether to get romantically involved, right?
You make it sound so awesome.
Yeah, I'm trying to not impose anything one way or the other on it. A guy trying to bed a gal is actually involved in a parasitic behavior. Now, in modern times, it may not be this way because it may be that he, his conscious mind full well understands that she is going to control whether or not she gets pregnant. And so there's no real parasitism possible at that level. But a guy trying to bed a gal birth control, right, is effectively attempting to inflict a pregnancy on somebody who will then invest all of the labor in raising an offspring that is only 50% related to her. That's a parasitism, right? However, the possibility of a relationship that is reproductive and worthy of both partners, right? The point is that would-be parasitism is adjacent to a obvious, profound mutualism in which two people decide to team up on the raising of offspring and the creation of a home and all of those things. And, we sometimes hear people almost jokingly talk about a fetus being a parasite on the mother, which is not correct, but it is actually half correct in the case that the father has not stuck around, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because the female has been put in the position of raising an offspring. She's divided her genome in half, fused it with half a genome from somebody else, and if that guy skips out, then the point is the half the genome that isn't related to her that she is raising, that is she is effectively forced into a degree of altruism, raising this other half a genome. But if they partner, then it is not that at all, right? Then the point is, yes, she's only, her offspring is only 50% related to her, but the guy is putting in enough effort that the point is she can actually raise twice as many of them, and she recovers that as a matter of a mutualism. So anyway, now we've taken all the fun out of sex, romance, and all of that stuff. But the idea that there is an exact map of this sort of tension between parasitism and mutualism over in human romantic space it's really profound once you see it.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. I thought you were going to go into genomic imprinting space, but maybe that's a bridge too far for today.
Yeah, I think
right.
We've done enough of the dry sucking the fun out of romance biology for one afternoon, but maybe a future episode.
All right. So we thought we'd start there, just to raise issues raise to consciousness questions of when you see interactions between two players, let's just leave it vague, entities, who appears to be control, who appears to be driving, who appears to be conscious, who appears to be making decisions that benefit them, it's not always what it seems. And that is in service of what you wanted to talk about next around issues of narrative control.
Yeah. So I wanted to add one more thing, which I think is a good transition.
Okay.
Not always what it seems, right?
Mm-hmm.
In the case of ants, right, the queen is named as if she is the boss of everybody else. And it's not obvious that that was actually a proper description. Yes, the colony is acting in service of the queen, but in some sense, she is as much a slave of the colony as she is its director. She is not actually in a position to dictate what the ants do. It is this underlying genetic fact of their close relatedness that causes them to behave in such a way that this queen, who is totally hobbled by her
She's just
role,
an egg factory.
Yeah,
she's just producing mostly daughters, some sons, but mostly daughters, all of whom are more closely related to each other than they are to their mom, if they're full sibs, and she's just pumping out eggs.
Pumping out eggs.
When they're fertilized, they're daughters. When they're not fertilized, they're sons, and it's just that's what she's doing.
And
day in, day out.
You can get a totally wrong idea. In fact, I had the once in a lifetime pleasure of watching a colony of these ants, these farming ants, move from one burrow to another. And probably that was a result of the fact that something had gotten in and they needed to move in order to escape a parasite. But I watched them. Hubie, who was on BCI when I was there studying leafcutter ants, knew that the move was happening, and he and I went and filmed it. But anyway, the point was the queen was being moved, right? We saw the queen being moved. She was so distorted by her reproductive role, she couldn't even walk, right? She was literally being carried. And you can imagine that early, scientific appreciators of these ants might look at it, it's like a queen in a litter being escorted to her new nest. But that's a projection of a human construct that is really not very similar, right? Mm-hmm. She is a reproductive slave of the colony as much as anything else. So, which then brings us to your transition about things not being necessarily what they seem, and the confusion surrounding corruption and narrative control in our modern circumstance.